Hello
Hello,
and
how are
welcome.
you?
And welcome to Friday, January 21st, day 4,822 of Flatten the Curve. This is just wonderful. This is still going on. My name is Erich Hartman, and I'm apoplectic.
And I'm Jessica Hockett. I'm not I used to be apoplectic. I'm trying to be glass half full these days. I'm trying to be more optimistic because I think there's been a shift. I think there's been a turn in this COVID forever narrative toward realism.
What do you think has been the shift in the last week?
What has caused it, or what do I
Yeah,
sense?
what are you seeing? What are the tea leaves that you are reading for your positivity?
I thought that the OSHA decision would signal a shift. And I feel like it did. I feel like there were a lot of workers who were relieved. Okay, that's not in place. Okay, I have some more choices. And so I think that coupled with the unprecedented, we love that word, right? Unprecedented rise in cases in states that are very obedient and doing all the right things, right? Like your state, New York, and my state, Illinois, and then California. Like we see these states, despite their mitigations and their passports and their masking, like they have not stopped the spread of COVID. And so I think those states are becoming increasingly, the outliers, and I think people see like, okay, that's it. Like we've got to move on. This isn't working. People are vaccinated if they want to be, and we have to move on. Oh, look at that. Look at that.
Yep,
I
that's
love
what
this article.
I was trying to get. Yeah, doesn't matter how obedient they are. It's just going to happen. And there's Israel with their fourth shot.
They're boosting away. I mean, there's boosting going on, right? They're boosting. There's a boost of the case numbers.
There's a boost. Yeah,
There's
I
a
guess you could call
boost,
it that.
right? Do you know, in Israel, are they encouraged to shall we say, to the level that we are to go get tested? Like, do they have a testing? Does anyone really have the testing push that we do?
I think they do. I mean,
Okay.
I know
Okay.
that there's certainly more people that are more up on Israel than me, but yeah, I get the sense that they're, from what I've seen and read, that they're all over this thing. They got the testing, they got the Vax Pass, they got they were the first to go to 2 jabs, now then 3, and then 4. And I don't know if you saw the interview. It was on Unheard, with one of their chief doctors, and one of the people on the advisory committee for vaccines, and he was just like, this is not working. As a matter of fact, it seems like it's doing the opposite of working, which is scary. And I think a lot of the people are like, what, WTF? What?
Right. What explains this, right? I mean, and so I guess if there's an upside to all of this, is maybe it wakes kind of the average obedient, compliant person up. I mean, the people who are really all in on, zero COVID, COVID forever, I love this pandemic. It's going to take them a while to wake up, if they ever will. But I feel like sort of the average person who was go along to get along is like, this doesn't really make sense. This isn't what we would have expected with widespread availability of treatments and vaccine. Like what's going on? So I feel like people are questioning more. I hope. And if I feel that way in Chicagoland, I mean, I know many parts of the country were over this a long time long time ago, right? But where you live in suburban New York City and where I live in suburban Chicago, we've seen just almost complete devotion to this pandemic, and I hope people are starting to come out of that. I hope.
Yeah, and this is a news article that's right off of the heels of the Israeli experience and data, right? Which is, we see the regulators in Europe embracing this. We see, the WHO came out with this a few days ago. And this was part of their decision in the UK. They backed off of the boosters. They said, and not only did they find that the boosters don't protect against Omicron, right? Um, as we saw from that chart, it's like it's a hockey stick.
Right.
And it's one of these things where, and we've been doing this the entire, pandemic, which is, we're put in a position of arguing evidence, right? Like real world data against the science, right? Or against their theories or against what they claim should be. And, these are very smart, credentialed people, right? But, schools was a really big example of this, right? Early on, we saw that, Sweden and, parts of Switzerland and other places kept their kids in school. And not only did all the kids not die, but schools weirdly were coming out to be some of the safest, statistically the safest places in the community, right? And we're going, look at this, like this is very interesting. And for 24 months now they've said, don't look at that, right? Look at our models or our our interviews where we think a nightmare scenario could happen. Let's plan on that nightmare scenario. Let's ignore this real world data. And I just think that has just been tragic. It's been so unhelpful.
Yeah, and not only have people ignored the real world data, kind of they've chosen this contrived reality for the reality that they experience every day. Now, I'm not going to try to estimate this, but I think it's fair to say that most people do not know a child who's been hospitalized because of COVID, right? And only because of COVID. Or most people do not know a child who has died, certainly not a healthy child who has died with COVID, or even among adults. Like, I mean, you hear people on Twitter claim, like, I know 20 people, 20 of
Yeah,
my friends
all the
died
time.
or whatever. Yeah, but that, I'm not sure about that. But at what point do people look around them and say, okay, like there are not people dying in the streets. I don't know tons of people that have died of COVID. Like maybe there's a bit of a disconnect between what I'm being told or shown and what I'm actually experiencing. But it's like people have chosen to live this set of experiences that's not consistent with what's actually happening in their world. I find that fascinating. It's like the
Totally.
ultimate reality TV show where like you're putting yourself in a situation, like imagining that you're in this doomsday scenario that you're not really in, right? But you're like invested in it, but it's not really happening outside your door. That's fascinating to me. It's like some weird version of the Truman Show.
Saw it yesterday. There was you can see these waves of coordinated messaging, right, rolling through social media. And over the last like 18 hours, there's been, Omicron is not mild. Hospitals are overwhelmed. And people started, claiming that, we were seeing, higher death, for under fives. And you start sort of peeling back, and there's nothing really to back this up. It's all, firsthand accounts from third-hand people, right? And this is something that we've seen throughout the entire pandemic, which is, I heard from a friend who heard it from a neighbor, and therefore it's now a headline, and it's like it doesn't, and even when we find out that those things aren't true, they shrug their shoulders and they say, well, it could have been, and it's better that we prepare for the worst, right? Like this whole idea of scaring people, and it's the noble lie, right? It's this idea, if we fudge it up, there's no downside to overplaying the potential negative. And of course there is, right?
Right.
It's
For
just
2
that
years, right? There has been. We see the negative effects of it.
absolutely.
It's like a kind of social contagion. I think that's at at play here. I mean, some people say I've said before mass delusion event, mass psychosis. We have, that idea out there now. And I think it's almost undeniable that social media, especially, and mainstream media have fueled this panic and this panic messaging that some people just continue to believe in, again, in spite of what they're actually seeing and experiencing in the real world, right? Like, I have a nurse friend who works at X hospital, and she said that they're completely overwhelmed with COVID. And then you say, well, what hospital is it? And then you go check it, right? Because there's data. We can look at the HHS data for every facility in the United States, and you're like, no, they're okay. They're at, or they're no busier than they would be in a respiratory virus season.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's really interesting about, the overall state of our healthcare, right? And it's we knew that our healthcare was, you know, kind of messed up before this came around, right? And we could probably have a whole conversation about socialized medicine versus single payer versus whatever, but it is a fact that private equity and other large moneyed interests have consolidated and taken over a lot of these very large hospital networks. And the Obamacare thing was very, very messy, but it was essentially this deal with the devil between this public-private partnership, which everybody claims to endorse until the real world hits. And then when you realize it's the worst of both worlds, right? It's the worst of capitalism. It's the worst of government. And you have this trend in the last couple decades of, really running hospitals, from a spreadsheet, right? And they are a money-making operation, right? There are insurance things, there are there's there's so much to deal with, and it's created just this absolute monster. But my point is that even before COVID, hospitals ran their ICUs in the 90 percentiles anyway, because they're very expensive units to keep up. And if you don't have them, filled at like 92, 93% in normal times, then you're losing money. Now, again, we can have a larger conversation about whether that's a good thing or that's healthy, but to pretend like that wasn't the case, and all of a sudden in COVID, and we've always heard this, oh my God, the ICUs in hospital X are at 94%. And it's like, well, that's pretty normal. That's really normal.
Right. I think I posted last night on Twitter an article from, I think it was January 2018, that Time Magazine did on how full the hospitals were. Did I say 2018? 2018. During that flu season, and about how full the hospitals were, and that there are hospitals that were setting up tents, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, that happened, but nobody, including Time Magazine, nobody was calling for the shutdown of schools, right? Nobody was calling for vaccine passports or masks on toddlers, right?
It's right here.
Oh, there
and
it is.
This is from 2018. This is the 2018 flu season. Hospitals overwhelmed by flu patients. I don't remember this.
No.
Right? Like, I don't remember the national outcry at this. Right? And if you read through this article, to your point, it's literally everything that has been puffed up and, screamed about for the last 24 months happened in 2017, 2018. They had people in tents. They had hallways spilling. Actually, they actually used the tents in 2017. Sure. Unlike, with COVID, we didn't use the tents. We just didn't. We had them in New York. We didn't use any of them.
Well, it's funny because toward the beginning of this, my sister's a doctor. She's a medical doctor. And she said to me, when I was working at the pediatric hospital in Louisville, Kentucky, she said, we set up tents every RSV season.
Yes.
When RSV goes up and,
right.
we set up the tents, and it's what we did. It's how we handled the capacity increase. But again, nobody was calling for school shutdowns or masking during previous RSV seasons so that the hospital didn't have to set up tents, right? So I just think we weren't aware of it, and it wasn't made part of this hysteria, right, where we have to protect the hospitals. I think that's part of the messaging that has really changed the way people think about just viruses or societal or individual obligation during seasons of high prevalence, right? I want to get back to that. I want to get back to that Time magazine time period.
Well, but it
2018.
yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. Again, like I'll just read through this. You know, the 2017-2018 influenza epidemic is sending people to hospitals and urgent care centers in every state. And medical centers are responding with extraordinary measures, asking staff to work overtime, setting up triage tents, restricting friends and family visits, and canceling elective surgeries, to name a few.
Sounds
Right?
familiar.
Yeah, it totally does. And then here's the doctor. And again, you can see how they were trying to dial up the fear here. And again, I think it has a lot of the same DNA that COVID has had, right? Because you have Time Magazine here who are honestly trying to get clicks, right? Negative stuff sells better than positive stuff. You have these doctors like this one who, I would like to assume they're trying to be helpful, right? Because, if you're in the head of somebody like Dr. Alfred Talia, right, who is saying here, we're pretty much at capacity and the volume is certainly different than previous flu seasons, right? So the headspace of this doctor is, if I scare people, right, if I make this out to be a scary thing, then people will be more careful, right?
What does it involve, though?
I
Washing
don't
their hands
know.
more?
Well, I mean, now it means, masks, jabs, lock in, plexi. We have, unfortunately, these NPIs that don't work that people are leaning on to solve for this. But the instinct, right, was very much here in 2018.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? I mean, looking at it now, you're like, were they planting the seed? I mean, I don't think that, but I mean, it's easy
Yeah.
to see how people can get off into those kinds of conspiracy or that kind of thinking. Yeah, it almost seems like they were planting the seeds of panic at this time, or just that later. I mean, like you said, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Isn't that the adage in journalism that
Yeah.
media is just doing what media does, and they know that panic sells. So they've done this before. This is not new. This is not new for them.
No, not at all. And so like even this doctor continues. I've been in practice for 30 years, and it's been a good 15 or 20 years since I've seen flu-related illness scenarios like we've had this year. The hospital is managing just barely. Again, yeah.
Keep scrolling. There's a part in there about Loyola hospital system, which is in the Chicago area here. Loyola.
There it is.
Here we go.
Loyola
There
University.
we go. Read that. You're closer to it than I am.
Loyola University Health System in Chicago, which set up a hospital flu activity record of 190 confirmed cases between January 7 and 13, has also instituted similar visitor restrictions, although a spokesman for the hospital says it's a standard precaution for flu season. Right? There's that little bit of truth, which I think it's not as buried in the article here in 2018 than it would be now, right? Like you have to get to paragraph 24 now to get something like that.
Well, and just a tangent off that for a second, a few days ago, I did submit a FOIA request to the Chicago Department of Public Health for hospital capacity and use data back to 2015. So I may or may not get that. I hope I do. But my contention is that hospitals were busier in 2017, 2018 flu season than they've been since March 2020. I see that in the Chicago ER data, which is available back to 2015. And so I'm really curious, like where is that data? Let's see let's get some context. Where were hospitals 5 years ago? Let's see a graph. Let's see a chart. But I think it's curious that we don't seem to have that data.
Totally. My phone's getting ready to die. So I'm actually going to switch my plug-in here real quick.
Got it.
But yeah, this article, it's funny because somebody brought this up, and it's interesting how we hear about the same kinds of things at the same time, right? Because This wasn't that long ago. This was 4 years ago. Exactly. That this happened. And what was happening, I guess we were all concerned about Trump, right? Like that's what that's how, if Trump hadn't have been around, we probably would remember this because they probably would have puffed this up more and it would have had more oxygen, right?
Sure. Go back to that article. What's that headline? It said COVID and Omicron, the one that you had up
Oh, hold on.
before. I'm curious because I know you're in advertising, marketing, that world. What do you think about the branding and like the brand? I would call it the branding and the rebranding of COVID that we're seeing, right? Like, so first it was COVID, and then it's Delta, and then it's Omicron. Like, what do you think about that? Like, do you think that's a conscious decision, or do you think that's something that just happens, like the media plays a role in that? Do you see what I mean? Like, we
This
keep
one.
getting this rebrand, right? So it's interesting, even in this headline, COVID boosters do not provide protection against Omicron. Study finds. So even within that, like we have mentioned of COVID boosters, and then Omicron. I lost you.
Yeah, I'm
You
here
did,
now. I
yeah.
had to put on my
Yeah.
headphones.
No
I
worries.
didn't charge up my phone before I did it.
No worries.
But
Do
yeah, I mean,
do you notice that this branding and rebranding of COVID? I mean, it's again, we're coming up on 2 years now. Do you think it's intentional, unintentional? What if
again,
what
yeah, I mean, it's definitely has some elements of branding. I still don't think that this is, and I know you're not suggesting this, right? But I don't think that this is coordinated from that kind of level. I don't think,
Mhm.
even though we had like the World Economic Forum and the Event 201 and all this stuff where they sort of doped a lot of the stuff out. I actually do think that a lot of these people are taking advantage of the situation. Um,
Mhm.
but in terms of let's roll out Omega Pi, I don't think it's like that. I think that this is the natural trajectory. They're trying to track these mutations, right? And but with each one, we have this again. It goes back to the noble lie. It goes back to puffing up this stuff in order to incentivize people to comply, right? I wish I actually had it today, and I'll find it. But like that clip of Fauci, right, from back in the AIDS days, where he's on camera and he's talking about how it's coming after kids and it's coming after your grandparents,
Mhm.
and and I'll find it. But it's obvious what he's doing. You know what I mean? And again, there's a savior complex there. There is sort of a hubristic control mechanism that's going on there. But I don't necessarily think the Faucis of the world are evil people. I think that they're humans. I think they're really flawed people, and there's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of power involved, right? And I think a lot of these unfortunate human characteristics, which we all share, come burbling to the surface. And especially when somebody's in a position like that,
Sure.
right? That's what
Sure.
happens. And so to answer your question, like, I don't think it's that they're trying to do this. I think it comes back to, oh my God, Delta, mild it was compared to Delta. They're still disappointed. They're trying to make it into not mild, with, stories.
I just think it's interesting, like with flu, we have strains with flu, right? And then
Yeah,
we've always called them by, even in that Time Magazine article that we were looking at just a little bit ago, they, I think, called the strain by its letter number combination, right? H2,
right.
whatever that one
Yeah.
is. And yeah, I mean, I guess because we always just called it flu, right? But I just find it interesting how we've given now these names, these Greek, Greek alphabet names, and how they've just kind of carried these names seem to keep carrying the virus into the next stage and into the next wave, right? Like now we're like naming the waves that's happening, and I think it helps keep the panic alive. I really do.
That is true. I think you're right there. Because I'm not sure if influenza mutates faster than coronaviruses, right? Like, but they certainly both mutate,
Right.
right? Which was the challenge for getting a flu shot, right? And it still is. I don't know how many flu shots you've gotten, but I've gotten several, and it turns out that a lot of them were from the previous year's, mutation, right? Because that's what they have to do. They have to create the attenuated version of the virus, of the mutation that they think is going to be the dominant variant that season, and they don't get it a lot of the times. They miss it. Sometimes they get it at first, and it sort of mutates beyond them.
Yeah, I don't know.
But
I'll have to do some reading on this. Is a variant and a flu strain the same thing? I don't know. And I
oh
know
yeah,
you're not an MD either, but I wonder, because I always thought that they picked the flu vaccine for a given year sort of based on, right, either the previous year, what was or wasn't prevalent, or what's going on in the southern hemisphere, since their season is at a different time than ours. So yeah, we'll have to look into that. I don't know the ins and outs, but we've always just called it flu.
right.
Right. And just said, oh, flu strain, or the flu is really bad this year, right? That's been the shorthand. But now with this Omicron, Delta, Omega, like we'll see where it goes after Omicron, right?
It was really interesting because I had a very good doctor, probably about 10 years ago now, but he was in the city. He was like top 10 Manhattan doctors. And I was very lucky to get him. And he was really good. He was like, super smart guy, had a great bedside manner. He was really, sort of down to earth. He was the kind of doctor that, didn't put up with your shit, but also was sort of, creative, in a sort of a medical way. You know what I mean? Like he was a really good combo. But I remember I asked him for the flu vaccine one year, and he goes, "You mean the flu shot?" And I was like, "What?" And he was like, "Yeah, it's not a vaccine." And I was like, "That's what they call it." And he's like, "That's what the media calls it." He goes, "It can help." He goes, I recommend you get it. And he was the one that sort of explained to me, how they develop it. And it actually turns out that year I got super duper sick. I got the flu shot in like early fall, and it was 2011. And I got the flu shot, but that was a year that was famous for the flu shot totally missing the actual strain that was flying through society. And it wasn't quite like, the Time Magazine 2018 flu year, I guess, but I got really socked, like bad. I had 106 fever for like a day and a half. I tried to go to the hospital, and it was a nightmare. They wouldn't treat me. They literally said, "Go home and get rest and drink fluids and call us back when you fall over." Sound familiar? But it was interesting because I've been talking to people about this, and there's other people that we know that have had really, really bad flu. And one of the things that they share is that they got the flu shot that year. And again, I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but you know, that chart that we held up with Israel and that news story about the boosters not being effective against Omicron, Israel is actually finding out. And again, this is evidentiary, right? I don't think that they figured out like the biological mechanics of this, but their theory is becoming something like, are the boosters reducing your immunity? I mean, are they doing something where they're increasing antibodies, but they're making people more susceptible, right? And I don't think that we know. And that's pretty frightening, honestly.
Am I muted? Was I muted?
You were, but that's okay.
Okay.
But you're
I'm
back
so
now.
sorry. I'm so sorry. No, I was gonna say that that's not that position, or that questioning is it's been positioned as being anti-vax. I don't think that's being anti-vax to say, like, is there a
No,
connection maybe between the shot and between the cases? Or, hey, look, I know a lot of people who've been sick this winter. As far as I know, most of them are vaccinated. Like, can we ask some questions about that? Again, that's not being anti-vax. It's being scientific, right? And it's using common sense too. Like, maybe there's a connection here, but I think all the pressure and push, and I would say propaganda too, around getting the shot, doesn't give us a, I don't know, an environment where you feel like in polite company you can even question some of those
you
things
can't.
without being branded in some way. And back to your conversation with your healthcare provider about the flu shot. I mean, it doesn't sound like you received a lot of pressure around getting it, right? Or I mean, is
No,
that the case? Like, did your
no,
doctor was just giving you some recommendations, like, yeah, I think you should get it because this. But if
yeah,
you would have said no in that moment, like, would he have shamed
no,
you? Would he
no, not
have?
at all.
No, of course not, because he's just casting it as, yeah, it's something you should get. It can reduce your chances of getting really
Right.
sick.
And
So
I appreciated his honesty. Remember, like that was the first time I had heard about that you know, that how they made it was that they looked at sort of all the variants building, right, and around the world, and there was this sort of decentralized virology share. Hey, we picked up this one over here because again, it's endemic, it's seasonal, right? We look at flu going from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere. So that's how they do it. And when he told me that there's a chance that you get it and it's the wrong variant, I remember thinking like, huh, thanks. Like I still got it, but like thanks for being honest. And it was sort of, it was what it was. It was just information, right? And
right,
and I didn't
right.
I didn't expect medicals. I wasn't like, well, screw you, medical science, like,
Right.
all right,
Well, because he was honest with you, right? I mean, he
right.
was he was real with you, and it wasn't about just, I mean, I don't think he said to you, or correct me if I'm wrong, like, you should get this to protect others. Like, was that part of the conversation at all? Other
No,
people weren't
not at
part of
all.
it, right? It was
No,
just about you and the direct
personal
medical
protection.
benefit. Right, the direct
Absolutely.
medical benefit, or
Which
the
didn't work that year.
anticipated. Right, right, but the anticipated direct medical benefit to you, and that has been completely absent really from the conversations around the COVID vaccine. It's just like, you have to get this. It's the unvaccinated's fault, pandemic of the unvaccinated, all this shame around it. And that breeds mistrust, right? I mean, is it any
It
wonder?
certainly does. Absolutely does. But they don't care. And it's one of these things, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya brings this up a lot. Vinay brings this up a lot. And this is what you just said, which is this trust in public health, right? And I think that we've seen how imperfect public health can be, right? And I actually think that, at least for me, it seems pretty obvious that we had all put way too much blind trust in public health prior to COVID. And I actually don't think that that's a bad thing. But what you just said is a bad thing, which is this this authoritarian approach. Um, and it's really, the people that are forcing, like, did you hear the Howard Stern, sound bites where he is, he's like, Captain, take away, we shouldn't be treating unvaccinated people in hospitals anymore,
No, I
right?
didn't hear
Because,
that.
and he's like, he apparently is hiding in his basement, and he's scared to come out because the society is not 100% max vaxxed, right? That's his position. And he recently saw that Oprah had a holiday party, and his head exploded, right? Because he thought Oprah was one of the good ones. And he was just like, I'm so ashamed, I'm so embarrassed for Oprah. I can't believe that she invited people over. And, it's this kind, he was like, screw your freedoms, you know, and, um, what that's doing to not only this, but other things. I have parents in our local group who are like, I'm not even getting the flu shot anymore from my family
Right,
because I
right.
don't trust these people.
Right. It's engendered a lot of suspicion around things that, in general, many people accepted as okay. And I never wondered if my neighbor's kid had the measles shot. I don't care. My kids did, right? Like it,
Right.
it doesn't bother me. But now it's you kind of look at people who in the past were labeled as anti-vaxxers, and you're like, I don't know, maybe they had some of this stuff right. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't
Right.
know. But after this, yeah, it just makes you question every piece of medical advice that you were ever given, right? Which cannot be good for doctors. It can't be good for public health or even society's health.
Did you see the BMJ editorial yesterday?
No, I missed it. What was it?
Yeah, I mean, I would bring it up, but it's pretty dense. I mean, essentially, the editors of the BMJ wrote, an editorial, and they said that,
Wait, I have to pause. I have to pause. Somebody keeps ringing my doorbell. I'm so sorry to
oh,
do
okay,
this. I'm so sorry.
no
Okay, be
worries.
right back. BRB.
Let me see if I can actually bring up this article from the BMJ. We can look at it.
Hey, honey, I'm done with the meeting. The girls are over at Rachel's house.
I'm gonna mute her mic. Now, just real quick, back to the 2018 influenza epidemic. These were just sharing a couple more news articles about the 2018 epidemic. This was everywhere. And again, we didn't see this because, again, something was going on with Trump, but it was a big deal. There were people in tents, and spilling out in the hallways.
I love
And
that all those headlines say overwhelmed, right? Like that word overwhelmed, right? Which we see, which I'm not even really sure what that means, if there's like a metric behind what overwhelmed means. But yeah, it's definitely the hospitals are overwhelmed. But nobody was casting it as our responsibility to make sure hospitals don't get overwhelmed, right? Do any of those articles
right.
kind of say that?
And again, it was in paragraph 4 back then, whereas today, if they say it at all, it would be buried at the very, very, very end.
Sure.
But so super quick story. I live in Westchester, and New York got hit by the first COVID wave, right? We had, I think, not the first case in the country, but there was this lawyer in New Rochelle, which is the next town over, who was a super spreader, and it really hit us really hard. And they had the boat, and they built the field hospital at the Javits Center, which is a huge conference center in Midtown. And then they did the field hospital in Central Park. You remember all this, right? They actually spent $12 million to quickly build a COVID-only hospital in Brooklyn, right? Because they saw China, with their bulldozers building theirs. And so New York was like, we're going to do it. And so we had the SHIP, the Javits, Central Park, and this Brooklyn hospital. And they never used any of them. They tried to use the SHIP, but merely for separation, right? To keep COVID positive people from the other patients. And it turns out that they, in all their wisdom, they actually mixed the patients, right, in both the hospital and the SHIP. And so they pulled the plug on the SHIP because I think it was just complicating things. And they sent the SHIP back. They took down the Javits Center. They took down Central Park. And apparently, I think that they have demolished the hospital. I don't know what quite happened to it, but they didn't use any of this stuff. And again, they were using tents in 2018 for flu. Think about that, right? We did not hear about this, which is on the screen right now. We did not hear that hospitals were overwhelmed by a surge in flu cases. And they were actually using their hallways back then.
Well, along the same lines, I mean, in Chicago, I just looked up so I could get the numbers, but we had a McCormick Place, which is a huge, for people who don't know, it's a huge convention center, and they spent $66 million to outfit McCormick Place with 2,700 beds, have this hospital. And do you know how many were used? 38. 38. So the Chicago Sun-Times reported in August 2020 that this turned out to be $1.7 million per patient that was actually used, or not. I mean, not used. The facility wasn't used. And so it makes me think, like, well, maybe there's a reason that we do tents at certain times of year, because tents are cheap and tents are easy to put up and they're easy to take down, and they do the job that they need to do. And the $66 million, who benefited from that? Right? Like, people got paid
That's a good
in order
question.
to outfit that. And they might say later on in this article, I have to take a look. It involved the Army Corps of Engineers and some other,
Of course,
Walsh Pepper and
we hear
construction, right? So people benefited from this, but it wasn't even needed, right? And it didn't. What purpose did that serve? Just a total albatross, waste of money, total waste of money.
I think that the people that got the money would claim that it wasn't a waste of money, right? Like the safetyists and the profiteers.
Right. Better to build it and not need it than need it and not have it. Right. Isn't that the idea? Yeah. Just a total waste. And actually, we don't hear, I mean, a couple of times in the past few weeks, I think some reporters have asked Mayor Lori Lightfoot of Chicago, and maybe the governor too, like, well, is there a plan to open up McCormick Center again? You know, like, if our hospitals are so overwhelmed, that's sort of the implication of the question. And to my knowledge, they've both said, like, no, we're not doing that. Well, right, because this is not really a crisis situation. This is just your chance to, keep the panic alive and make this seem like it's more deadly than it really is. Unfortunately,
again, I think it. Yeah, and again, I keep saying, I think it comes back to this idea that the more panic, the more fear, the better, because the more scared the public is, the more likely they will be to go along with their recommendations, which they feel are correct. And you can't question them. And if you question them, you are diminishing them, and you're diminishing their efficacy, right? That's the weird, like, logic puzzle that they have created.
Right. Well, but they will always blame it on the citizenry, right? Like, you don't care, like, certain people don't care enough. My governor famously tweeted, I think it was in August 2020, like, if you won't wear a mask, the mask is not the enemy. If you won't wear a mask to protect others, the enemy is you. The enemy is you. And that's what some of these leaders have done. They've deflected blame from them, and they've turned all of this into our fault. I don't know. Are you a Sondheim fan? Do you know Into the Woods by Stephen Sondheim, that musical?
I'm not a big musical guy.
All right.
Well, Stephen Sondheim. Yeah, sure.
I'll be the musical person on this show, but there's a song in Into the Woods called Your Fault. And it's all these different characters blaming everything that's happened on each other. It was your fault. No, it was your fault. It was your fault. And I feel like I'm in that scene in that musical, but all of our government and public health officials are, like, turning their, fingers toward the unvaccinated, or the people that don't want to wear a mask, or the people that wanted kids back in school, right? You don't care enough. That's why we're in this situation, right? It's so obvious. The scapegoating is so obvious to me. I don't know why more people don't see it, but I guess if you've bought into it the whole time, it's very hard to come out of that. I think that's very hard psychologically.
Well, but I think that's the root of the problem, right? Which is, there's one side which is, this is bad, but we should look at data and give people accurate information as much as we can, and we should let them use their personal responsibility to sort of handle what's best for their families and them, and we'll, as a society, we'll help as much as we can. Obviously, we can argue about how much help that would be. But then there's another side that is, that thinks that everybody is an idiot, essentially, and wants to force them to do, sort of a menu of things, which, haven't been discussed, haven't been voted on or whatever, just sort of decided by the narrative police that this is what we're going to do. And it will only work if we all do it. And therefore you have to do it. And if you're not doing it, then you're selfish and you're killing people.
Right. If
And
if you're not for this, you're against it. Right. Like that's the fallacy.
It really is. It really is. So did you see this? The CDC came out.
Study?
Yeah.
Yep.
They came out and said that natural immunity is actually more effective. And this is just another one in a series of, breaking news items that we have known for 24 months now?
Something like that. Now these little kernels of truth kind of keep seeping out, right? It's not all at once. It's like this little thing here and this little thing here. Well, there's nothing truthful about that picture that you're showing of Rochelle Walensky, double masked. She's fully vaccinated and boosted, I'm sure, but yet she showed up at the last Senate hearing with those two masks on. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not why you're showing it. You're showing because of the headline. I got distracted by the double masking.
Always get distracted by the double masking. I mean, just ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, we've known, look, and here's another thing that we keep, battling about. We've been battling about this for 24 months, but it's like, do you know for sure, right, that natural immunity is better than vaccine? No, this could be the one case in history where that's not true. But there's certain assumptions about viruses and epidemics and even pandemics that if we would have just cautiously followed those historical trajectories, we would be in much better shape now with everything, right?
There's just so much we don't know about this virus, Erich. There's just so much we don't know.
We should just shut everything off then, yeah.
Because we just don't know. And I really don't know the answer to this question, but I've been noodling on it lately. When we talk about being immune to something, I think in the past, at least I thought that immune means like you don't get sick from something at all. Like your body doesn't have a disease response, but like there are different maybe levels of immunity. And I've got to think it's the like what doesn't kill you right now makes you stronger. I don't know that I believe, that I'm never going to get COVID again if I had it once. I think your body, you can't prevent the infection. Sure. So I think you're going to get it over and over again. But, if you've survived it once, unless something significant changes about your body and about your immune system, like I understand immunity to be like, yeah, just I can endure it. It's not going to be severe to me, unless something about me changes, right? Or as I get older, or as I become more susceptible, then it might be a real threat to me, right? Sure. Although I guess there's an argument to be made for like multiple exposures to something, even maybe when something changes about your body, you've built up an immune. I mean, I don't claim to know all the ins and outs about that, right? But I think people think immunity means something that maybe it doesn't really mean, and that there are different levels of immunity. I don't know.
It's very interesting because I have one of the first people that I glommed onto early was MichaelLevitt, who you're familiar with. But I was watching one of his interviews with the Nobel laureates, and they're it's pretty brilliant stuff. And actually, I'll share them in future episodes. But MichaelLevitt was pissed. Like he was very upset at the treatment of his community, of him, of the Great Barrington people. And this was early on. This was like in spring of 2020. But he said something that was very interesting, and it's exactly to your point, which is he was talking about the demographic stratification, right? And again, from Italy, even before Italy, we knew that old people got completely hammered by this thing, and kids were like magically spared. And he said something on one of his interviews that really stuck with me, and it was this. He said, look, in our profession, before this, if we looked at data that look like this on any other illness, right? We would have said that kids are immune, right? And we would have moved
Mm,
on. And it
right.
wasn't like we would have forgotten about them. But in terms of like bookkeeping, right, and medical focus, even though, yeah, like there are a handful of children that do die of this thing, right? And they, obviously the vast majority of them have some pretty serious comorbidities. But yeah, it could strike down that one, that one or two super healthy children. We don't want it to be our kids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But his point is that, you know, as a medical community, we would have said that kids are immune based on this data.
Sure.
And again, and we use that word, it doesn't mean 100%. It means that just in terms of how we do our job and how we need to move forward with this, that, all right, under 18s, let's put them over here, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're good,
Mm-hmm.
right? Of course, like, let's look out for them. Let's, tell parents, here are the symptoms, go to the hospital if X, Y, and Z. But why would we waste our community energy and our intellectual and emotional focus on a group that before now we would literally apply the tag of immunity to,
Right.
right?
Right. Right. No, exactly. And instead, we've gone the opposite way where, I
Yep.
mean, I've seen parents freak out, like just if their kid tests positive for SARS-CoV-2, and it's like, well, are they sick? Well, no, but they have COVID. I'm like, well, technically they've tested positive for the virus, but the virus is not triggering like a disease response, or, your child just has a cold. Like, were they hospitalized? Well, no. I'm like, okay, well, they might infect someone else. Well, like that's sort of the
And
way it works, right? Like
well,
that's
but that's where the myth of asymptomatic
right.
super spread comes in too.
Right. Well, and there was not only so that myth and the sense of like moral obligation that people like were given and assumed, like it's my responsibility to make sure that my infected body doesn't transmit this virus to someone else who could die. But we never, that's always been the case, right? But we've never thought of it that way, or we've never thought of sickness as being anything other than I'm actually sick, like I'm
Right.
actually experiencing symptoms, and I stay home so that I can aid my own recovery. And then when I feel better, then I go back to work, or I go back to school if
Right.
I'm 24 hours fever
Right.
free, or whatever the flu guideline has been. People have just completely changed their understanding of that, because there's something we just don't know about this virus, right? Like this COVID is different.
Right. Novel.
That's what it's novel, it's different, asymptomatic. We actually heard that yesterday in a case we have going on here in Illinois, that parents from 145 school districts have brought against their districts regarding masks and quarantines. And I sat there and listened to I watched the broadcast. I wasn't actually in the courtroom, but I heard the judge ask one of the defense lawyers, like, okay, if we have all these immunocompromised kids, or it's so important that we protect them with masks, like, why haven't schools done this before? Like, immunocompromised kids have always existed. They've always been in
Right.
school. And the lawyer's rationale was like, well, because it can be, you can have COVID and not know it, and there's asymptomatic transmission. I mean, it was just every
That
craziest that's out there. And I couldn't believe that she was representing a school district and was an attorney. And I couldn't believe that she was like back in March 2020 and denying the thousands of mask optional schools there are in the United States right now, by the way, and just could not get off that train. It was amazing to me.
again, it comes back. The asymptomatic spread has been so damaging. Again, it comes back to that novel, right? The novel nature of
Right.
it.
Right.
I am still surprised that they haven't trotted out the lab leak. And again, I think it's looking like it's likely because Fauci was involved in this, right? But the idea that it's man-made, to me, was always like, wow, I can't believe they're not using this to scare the shit out of people.
Right.
Because right,
Right.
because if it was natural, it's not as novel, right? If it's this Frankenstein thing, then it's scarier. And again, it's like I think that the reason why they haven't used that to scare the crap out of people is because they're likely implicated in this. But
Well, but isn't that messaging? I mean, when you think about the messaging of there's just so much we don't know about this virus is so unpredictable. We just don't know what this virus is going to do next. I mean, those are things that my governor still says.
still
And
says
it's like,
same here.
like things that you would say if it was man-made or man altered, but you didn't want to say that. Like those are the kind of
Yeah,
things
maybe.
that you would say. Otherwise, it's a coronavirus, right? I mean,
Right.
and SARS won, like
Common cold.
we've kind of been through this before, but that's not what the messaging was. And when you look at it or listen to that through the lens or with the filter of it being lab leaked, man engineered, man influenced, human influenced, that messaging makes sense. Right? How to say it without saying it. That's what I hear in those now in retrospect, for sure.
To- Totally. It's in my own little personal theory, I'm not alone, but you know, we do know that Fauci used taxpayer money to go around Obama's executive order against gain of function, um, and funded that lab. And we know that that's true to a certain degree. And something that again, this is just a theory, but something I've wondered from even early on was, the fact that they threw out the pandemic playbooks, right? Like, again, we all know this, like they war gamed this out. They
Mhm.
said, don't lock down, don't use mask, all like they literally said pretty much to do what Sweden did and Florida eventually did, right? But the behavior of Fauci, specifically, to me, rings true of somebody who really screwed up, right?
Mhm. Right.
Somebody who sort of hubristically felt like that they could, Obama doesn't know what he's doing. This was, they banned gain of function because they're scared. They don't understand what we're really doing. We're trying to create vaccines and solve things. So, we're going to call it something else. We're going to route around and we're going to fund this partner lab in China. And all of a sudden, my experiment gets out, right? And again, like this is just, we all do this, me putting my head in his head, but like a lot of what's happened to me at least feels like somebody going, holy shit,
Right.
I've got to
Right.
throw the entire kitchen sink at this thing. And that means nobody go outside, scare the shit out of people. Oh my God, like I know masks don't work, but fuck it, like just wear
Right.
hazmat suits because, on a certain level, you're it's your problem. You did it.
Right.
It's your
Right.
fault.
Well, and then this is maybe another topic, but so we panic, right? March 2020, we really panic. We shut things down. We killed a lot of people with the shutdown. We could do a
Killed a
whole
lot of
episode on
people.
that. We killed a lot of people. And then it's like, oh shoot, we killed a lot of people. Okay, now we can't let anyone know that our lockdowns and human interventions now not only help release this virus, but like we killed more people. And so I feel like again, not in a pandemic-y kind of a way, but there was definitely a response set into motion, and then they just couldn't stop after that, right? Like, we need testing infrastructure. Remember the ventilator push? We need ventilators. And I think we probably vented a lot of people in spring 2020 and killed
And we
people
killed them.
as a result. And so I feel it. I really feel like the evidence continues to mount over time that we really messed up. We messed up from beginning to end,
Oh,
and
totally. Catastrophe.
the overlords keep trying to okay, more boosters. Okay, now N95s, right? It's like, what is all of this about? But think about it. Like they just can't get out of the mess that they created from start to finish. And there's going to be consequences for decades. I don't mean to be gloom and doom about it, but this
I
will
agree.
reverberate for a very long time. Very long time.
Well, to that end, I shared this on Twitter yesterday. I think it's one of these things. Like I tend to be the guy that pushes send on this sort of stuff, and I do it on purpose because um, I think that it just icks most people out so much that they don't want to be the one to sort of send this stuff out into the ether. But I'm going to play this and we can talk about this. All right, hold on. That's hard to watch for me.
It's really hard to watch. Now,
And
go ahead.
no, I was just going to say that you know, their little mouths are gaping open in those masks because they can't breathe as well. And you know, parents are doing this to their kids. And what you just said about consequences, you know, I'm not even talking about Nuremberg 2.0 or whatever. I'm talking about, you know, people being damaged and kids being harmed. And I keep thinking about, you know, like most of these parents, all of these parents, I would even say, you know, like the vast, vast majority of them feel like that they're doing the right thing, that they're being safe, right? They're following the recommendations of people that they trust, that are experts, that know more than them, that are, you know, leaders in their field, and that's why this is happening. And there's going to come a point where the realization is going to set in for a lot of these parents, and I would not want to be one of those parents.
When do you think that realization will set in, and what do you think will make it set in? What will be the catalyst for that? Like, what will snap some people out of it? Like, do they have to see their
For
own
masks.
kids? Well, right, for masks, or just admitting the harms, right? I mean, I think there's still a lot of parents out there who aren't necessarily willing to admit the harms that remote learning cause. I mean, maybe that's the more socially acceptable thing to say now that was harmful, right? And then maybe by this time next year, people will be willing to admit that the forced masking of kids was harmful. Like, when do you think that's going to happen?
I think the masks are going to be a lot longer, unfortunately.
Well,
You know,
because parents masked their kids. I mean, even to go out into public, maybe even
oh
where
yeah,
they weren't required, or places maybe where they were kind of required, right? So I guess you had to tell your kids certain things in order to do that, right? And tell yourself certain things.
we have quarantine guidelines here, like you do in your schools, and I saw a video from our kids' third grade class, and it was a panorama. Like, and apparently, what they do for the kids that have to quarantine is they do have a remote option, which I feel bad for the teachers, right? Because they have to teach in class
Sure.
and, you know, kid on the screen, but they're doing it. And an 8-year-old little girl was on Zoom in a mask by herself in a room for this instruction, for this entire instruction. And, you know, the fact that parents believe that there is efficacy in these masks is a real problem. And I know that we fight this fight every day, right? With the data and the statistics and the stupid studies that the CDC relies on. But you know, as long as MSNBC and NPR and the New York Times insinuates that there is some sort of safety benefit to these
Right.
things, that they're not going to
Right.
go away. And also the fact that we're not talking about the downsides. And that's why this video, to me, it was such a powerful one, because it's like those kids are struggling to breathe, and it's affecting their face.
Right. I mean, not even so. Yeah, you thought of the breathing. That actually didn't occur to me when I was watching it first. It was I mean, yeah, their mouths are open and it's a breathing thing, but I was like, wow, they're probably less likely to mimic the faces that they're seeing, right? So their mouths, and I'm not a speech, development expert or anything like that, but I would think that their mouth is being exercised less. Plus, think about it, the caregiver and people
Yes.
around them are masked as well. I mean,
Right.
that's the thing.
That's
So
exactly right.
that experience and practice with the mimicry, right, and the reading of emotions, which didn't a few months ago the American Academy of Pediatrics like denied that, or said that
They
there's no
pulled it off of
research
their
on
website.
that.
They
Oh,
had a
like
whole section on
that's
their website they
criminal.
pulled off.
Yeah, that's criminal. But whenever I'm in a grocery and I see we don't see masked babies around here, or even very young kids, which is good. But whenever I see a baby in a grocery cart at the grocery, whether the parent is masked or not, and they usually are, but I don't wear a mask anywhere. But I smile like really, really huge, and I'm like,
Me too.
hi, and like doing all that, and they light up, and babies do that anyway, right? But I can't help but think like, wow, like how much experience has this young child had, in his or her short life, in seeing these human faces. We're going to see the consequences of it. We are. So I do think the harms will end up being documented and recognized. I just hate that it's going to take a while. That's what I hate about it.
This experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
Yeah,
It's hard to watch.
it's horrifying.
I mean, the mom, even as a mom, I saw, and you're a dad. It's the same thing, but it had to be hard for that. I assume that's the baby's real mom, but it had to be hard, even just an adult, right? Like it's so hard to sit there and then watch the baby like reach out to you and cry out to you and not do anything. It's so inhumane, really is. But yet that's what we're facing, or putting in front of not only babies but adults and kids, and then pretending like that doesn't have any effect on the way that we think, on the way that we feel, on the way that we communicate. It's just incredible to me, as somebody who spent 20 years in schools, various schools throughout the country, different countries, different kind of work. Like when I think about a masked school, it breaks my heart, and the denial that has to go on to pretend like this is a good and necessary thing. It's another noble lie is really what it is. Like, we have to do this or kids will die. Like, and that, I guess that's what you have to tell yourself, right? As a teacher, as a principal, I don't know.
That's what
I
they're
don't
doing.
know. It is what
And
they're doing.
the doctor, the researcher that actually did this video, and this is, I think it was from 17, like it wasn't that
Yeah.
long ago.
Yeah.
And this doctor very quickly, in the fall of 2020, came out with an addendum to this and literally said that he didn't think that face masks were that big of a problem.
Oh my word.
And Andrew Bostom, like, I think he knows the guy. He's, up in the Northeast, and he
Mhm.
went on a tear. He was just like, "Are you kidding me? Like, are you compromised? Like, this is absolutely what your experiment showed." Right?
Right.
How on earth can you do this? And he did the same thing that the American Academy of Pediatrics did, which was, essentially for the greater good, right? Because they believe that these things are efficacious and provide
Right.
some level of safety, that they must noble lie
Right.
the downside away.
Right. Well, and I feel like too, again, regardless of what we think or wonder or want to ask about the efficacy of the vaccine, it's a real disservice not only to kids, it's a disservice to adults who really are. I mean, and we know people like this through my husband's job who are like, I am not getting the vaccine, but I am wearing this mask. Do you know what I'm saying? Like they really remember when Biden took office, wasn't his tagline for a little bit like mask or vax, right? And he's giving this equivalence that again, regardless of what you think of the vaccine, can we not keep pretending that the masks are doing anything? Because that's putting vulnerable people I mean, they might engage in more risky
They're doing,
behaviors or
yes, of
activities,
course
right?
they
Like,
are. Of course
yeah,
they
I mean, and
are.
Jen Cabrera on Twitter, who's a reporter from Florida, like she's long made that argument. Like
Yes.
we are not helping people when we tell them that masks work. We're not helping vulnerable people whatsoever. So, yeah, that hurts not just kids but adults too. I think.
It absolutely added to spread. And I think that, when you look at the evidence, right, the charts, hold two's charts, Ian's chart, where you're comparing a place that did masks to a place that didn't do masks. You can almost make the case in a lot of these circumstances that the mask areas are worse. And
Right.
all of a sudden you're starting to think about, well, to your point, like, what are they doing? And I know that everybody, when we wear a mask, they're touching their face all the time, right? And we
Right.
know it's aerosol spread, but at the same time, this was previously thought to be, one of the main ways you get the flu or colds, is touching your face. Don't touch your eyes, don't touch your nose. There's a reason why a lot of people don't shake hands, in cold and flu season. You know what I mean? And again, who
Mhm.
knows? But when you're wearing masks like this, and we know that the viral particles can get through the masks easily, it's you could easily make a case for it that it makes it worse. It makes
Right.
people
Right.
take risks that they shouldn't take, right? Like if you
Right.
do have an immunocompromised grandma and your throat's a little itchy, like, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to see her
Sure.
because I have a brain, right?
Sure.
But there's a lot of people out there that have been charmed into thinking that masks work, and they're like, well, mask up, go see grandma, and then they kill grandma.
Sure.
It's like,
Sure.
what are you
Yeah.
doing?
Right. Right. Yeah, I don't know how we get out of that, but maybe, I mean, there has been the CDC now, is kind of sort of saying cloth doesn't stop viruses, which we've kind of always known, although isn't their language something like they're less effective or far less effective or something like that, but now they're upgrading to recommending N95s. I have a tendency
I
to
don't know
think
how
that
they can do that.
I don't think that's gonna catch on. I mean, maybe in your area, in my area, it will. And
Oh, it's catching on.
I mean, I joked on Twitter that now I'm gonna really know who to stay away from, right? Like you're wearing an N95, like and maybe that's good, right? Like I'm just gonna back off from you. You're taking this real seriously, so to speak. You're a real believer, or you're severely immunocompromised, and so then I'm gonna stay away from you. So maybe we'll have that effect of pointing out yeah, who's still really pro COVID.
Pro
Right?
COVID.
But yeah, pro
Yeah.
COVID is what I zero COVID agenda. Have they been distributed yet? This 400 million masks, these N95s, aren't they being distributed to like community centers and pharmacies? I mean, are those, what's going on with that? I haven't heard an update, but I can't keep
Yeah,
up with everything.
next few weeks. I know that they turned on the USPS ordering mechanism, and my local social media is all screenshots of people like I successfully ordered my free test from the post office. But the masks are specifically dumb. I mean, not just because they don't work, they don't, but you're gonna spend all that money to send every quote unquote every American a mask that you're not supposed to use more than once, and actually not even more than a few hours. Like, what does that even? I don't understand how that even makes sense. It's so
No.
theatrical. It's so political.
And are they going to send them to parts of the country where people have not really masked the whole time? I mean, that's an utter waste as well, right? Like, I wonder if there'll be data on that, like how many they shipped out to where, how many were actually picked up. You know what I'm saying? Like, I wonder, or there's like a triple supply for areas where you and I are, right? Like big blue areas are probably going to get more. I mean, we have more people too, so we'll get more here, but.
Well, I've seen people make that case, actually.
Yeah.
People that want the masks and really like them. They're like, well, why would you send them to like MAGA country where they're not going to wear them? Why don't you send us too?
Well, again, maybe this is a step toward, okay, if you want a mask, get an N95, but that doesn't require that everybody else wear one too, right? Because my N95 your N95 protects me. That's not a thing, right? Right? Isn't it just a source control
they'll make it a thing.
I mean, they'll make it a thing. They'll make it a thing. But I'm really curious to see how that goes.
But that's what scares me about the option, the mask optional. Because that's sort of the libertarian in me. Like, I like that. It makes sense. But man, these people, they'll still try and force it on everybody when they can, because again, you said this a couple times, it started off as like, it protects you, but they made it into this like bank shot weirdness where it's like your mask protects me,
right?
And so you have to do it,
right? In order for my mask and vaccine to work, you also have to be vaccinated and masked, right? That's where it's crossed over into a kind of like righteousness, and I mean, I would call it Pharisaical thinking, right? Like Pharisees, to make a biblical reference there, but like going around and telling everybody else what they have to do to protect you. So I hope it's dying out. I hope we'll see.
Well, but England or the UK is a bright spot. I thought that France had done the same thing yesterday, but they are lifting restrictions February 1st, but only for fully vaccinated people. So that's not the same thing.
Do they have passports there? Do you have to like show a? Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
But England is ending that. Is that they have different terminology than we do. So sometimes they speak English, but I'm like, they're calling this something different than we are. But certification, is that what they called it? Something like that's what Boris Johnson called it, I think. But that they had to show that everywhere they went. Was that the practice that was going on? I'll have to look into that. But it sounded like it was ending, or at least from the government point of view, it was ending. So we have Vax. You have Vax passport in New York City, right? We do in Chicago and then Cook County. I'm in DuPage County. We don't have that here, but yet. But I can't imagine it's going well. I can't imagine that. Shutting out unvaccinated 5-year-olds is really good for business. I just can't imagine, but they'll never say that.
Yeah, that's where the sort of the socialism comes in. It's like, well, the New Yorkers there are a lot of New Yorkers that love it. They're like, oh, vax passports, this is the way of the future. And then when the inevitable, stories come in, you're absolutely right, where businesses are, they're not doing that great. Like, businesses don't like it that much. They don't like being the vaccine police necessarily. They don't like being the mask police necessarily, and they're losing business. And then the people that like the masks and the passports will say, well, you can't just kowtow to money. It's not, it can't be economy over lives. right?
False dilemma. Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
it's a problem.
Well, and nobody wants to say out loud, or nobody cares. I don't know. But I mean, in Chicago, we have 50% of Black Chicagoans are fully vaccinated, right?
Oh,
So right off,
same here.
so
Same
right
here.
off the bat, I mean, right, and I'd have to look at the percentages for Hispanic and Asian and white. They're higher than that, although Hispanic is lower than Asian and white. But you're talk about systemic racism, like you're doing
They don't care.
something. It's de facto, like you're doing something that and can predict will result in a certain racial minority being disproportionately discriminated against. And so the argument that I've heard is like, well, it's not the same as racism because this is a choice. But well, religion is the choice too, by and large. So, and that's a protected class. Like we don't discriminate, hopefully, on the basis of that. So I'm not really sure the gymnastics that some of these people that with hate have no, hate has no home here signs in their yards, and they're so pro equity, and it's like, well, wait a minute, what about this? But that it doesn't seem to connect for them. I don't know. I mean, you're in these Facebook groups. Like, what is the rationale?
It's hypocrisy. I mean, it only
Right.
matters when it matters,
Right.
They don't want to hear it.
Mhm.
They also, it really illustrates how segregated. I don't like using that word because it's not, it's literally, how New York City functions, because, they're not enforcing vax passports very much in minority areas. They're just not.
Sure.
This is a
Right.
primarily a Park Slope and most of Manhattan,
Manhattan, right.
sort of thing, right? And I'm not really sure what's happening or if they're running into instances where unvaccinated minorities want to go into the Museum of Modern Art and are being denied. We've seen a few arrests and a few confrontations at like Applebee's and then actually the Museum of Natural History yesterday. But those are more, activists, going
Sure.
and sort of
Right.
forcing the police to act. Yeah, it's hypocrisy, and the thing that I've noticed is I think it feels to me like a lot of these elitist progressives, frankly, that are pushing this, um, they have the signs in their yard, but they treat minorities like minorities are retarded or something. Like they really
Mhm.
look
Mhm.
down on people, and it's very icky. And it comes out in their actions. They talk a big game. They have the yard signs. They have the Facebook things. But when the rubber hits the road, like they're just like, no, they must be forced to be
Right.
vaccinated. It's like, whoa, that's over the line there, buddy.
Right. And
But they don't see it.
they probably weren't open the schools advocates either. Although New York City
No,
did open their schools, I think, to more kids than Chicago did early
that's
on.
probably.
If I'm not
I think that's true.
mistaken. Um, our union's more ornery. I think the
Yes, they are.
CTU is they are something in a normal year. Like they are something
Well,
else.
but you have your mayor, like your mayor, who's not great on anything else, is literally going after the union because they're so terrible.
Yeah, she's the worst mayor in Chicago history. There's no question about that.
Something wrong with that woman.
I
She's weird.
know. I know, but 2023 I think is the first, unless something happens, it's the first opportunity that Chicagoans will have to vote her out, and I hope they do. I hope they
Do you
make
think
the right choice.
is she as unpopular internally as she seems?
Yeah. I mean, now we can only speak from our own circles and perspectives. Yeah, but I mean, plus we have the murder rate problem here. Like
Yeah.
it's not just COVID, right? So the 2023 race will be interesting. We have a governor's race coming up. Unfortunately, the candidates that we have in opposition to Pritzker on the Republican side, are not, I mean,
Great.
I'm going to vote for anybody who's not JB Pritzker. That's for sure. But now you have a governor's race. Do you coming up? Am I right?
We do. We
Okay.
do. We had Cuomo, He
Right.
was forced
Right.
out
Right.
for being not for killing all the grandparents, but
No, it wasn't about that at all.
for being a lech.
Yeah.
And we installed the lieutenant governor, who apparently was just, you know, you see these people on sort of local and state level who are not. They get in these roles when they're not really politicians.
Sure.
And you know, she's considered more of a like sort of a clerical, like a bureaucrat, right? You know what I mean? Like there's a
Mhm.
difference.
Right.
But you know, she finds herself in the governor's seat, and she's running again. And we have a handful of Republicans who actually are not that bad. I would say in third place we have Rudy Giuliani's son, Andrew Giuliani, which is
Mhm.
interesting because when I moved to New York, I remember Giuliani giving a press conference, and his son Andrew was standing next to him, going like goofing off, and Rudy Giuliani didn't see it, but it was super cute. Like it was all over the
Mhm.
news, and it was kind of like a meme before there were memes.
Right.
And so he's sort of in third place. He's very young.
Mhm.
And then there's Lee Zeldin. Actually, I think maybe he's the leader, at least in the polls right now. But he's from Long Island, and he was I would say he was sort of a MAGA-ish Republican. And then there's a guy named Rob Astorino who I know kind of well because he used to be the county executive in my county previously, and he actually got voted out in the midterm wave after Trump was elected,
Okay.
right? So there was a huge blowback in my hood when Trump beat Hillary. Like the
Mhm.
heads exploded, and you could hear them. You know, you go outside, pop, 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 pop. And so there was just no way even an even keeled Republican was going to win again, and so he got
Mhm.
bounced. But he is now running for governor. So those are the three guys. Um, I think that they have a real chance.
Good.
I
Wednesday,
really
is it
do.
November? Is that the election for you guys?
Yeah,
Nove yeah,
yeah.
us too. Yeah, us too. So, yeah, we need these tyrants out of power. That's for sure. Because
We're gonna.
they're not gonna apologize anytime soon or change their tune. So, although Newsom yesterday, did you see, said something like, we have to move, in his Newsomy way, we have to move toward the endemic stage, or I'm gonna
Yeah.
share my endemic plan, or I don't know. It's like I feel like when Newsom says stuff, it's like a dog whistle for the other, Dem governors that are so entrenched, right? Like you can, okay, like what's coming
Yep.
next? Remember when he's like, this is a seasonal virus. I think that was last September or October. Remember him? He just kind of like mentioned it, like this is something we're gonna see every year. So it's like they put him out there first. So we'll see what this plan actually involves. But
Well, he led the way on sort of the public health law leading, right? Because he was the first governor to give, like, he didn't do it through emergency powers. He did his mandate through the Department of Health
okay.
via, like, it coordinated with him giving a statement. And then our governor did the exact same thing, like 2 weeks later. So
Yeah, what do they
legally,
it's like they take turns, right? Like, you can always tell, okay, Pritzker went first on it's like it feels coordinated whether it is or not, right? But, like, Hochul will go
oh,
first on something, or New York City went first on the Vax passport, right? And then,
yep,
it came to was it in LA next, then Chicago, and then
sounds about
Boston,
right.
and you're just like, "Oh my gosh, like, you guys are you're so predictable," right? I mean, right?
Totally.
When you see these. Oh, yep, I saw
So
this
to that point,
graph.
this is I think I mentioned this when we talked. It was 9 and down to 5, but split. It was, right after the inauguration, the generic ballot was Democrats up, and now Democrats down.
Right. So this is a
It
graph
turned
of U.S. party identification and leaning, right? Gallup poll. So what party people identify with? Are they Democrat, or they tend to lean Democrat, or Republican tend to lean Republican? So
This is a
a
bloodbath.
shift. Yeah, we've seen a shift. So the percentage of people in responding to the poll who identify as Democrat or leaning Democrat has declined, right, from 49% earlier this year, right? I'm looking at the
Yeah, it was a year ago.
Yeah, a year
Year to
ago.
year.
Yep, you're right. A year ago, declined from 49% to 42%, and then Republican and Republican leaning has gone from 40% to 47%. So yeah, this does not bode well for midterms, or it does. I mean, right, depending on your perspective. But wow, what a change! And wait, let's look at when those lines crossed each other. Is that November? No, I don't like. Oh
Is
no,
it
it's quarterly. I'm so
Q1?
sorry. I read the graph. Duh. Right, quarterly. Okay, so uh,
That's fall.
right. So fall, late fall. Right. Interesting. What happened around that time? Booster? When were they calling for boosters? When was the first booster call? Do you remember?
Was it August? Was it that long ago?
I mean, yeah, I mean, quarter 3 would be August, right? Because January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September. So it would be right around then. So I don't know. Maybe that signaled a shift for some people, or their kids are still being masked at school, right? That would have been around that time too of the school start of the school year,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I don't know if it would need to be a thing. I'm a big fan of this. Well, fan. I'm a proponent of the sort of the slow red pill tsunami. And
Right.
it's just I just think that thousands of people every day are done.
Sure.
And then
Yeah.
once you're done, you're like, stop.
Right.
Like you're looking around, you're going, this is, all right, whether it was masks in school or the booster or my neighbor, is vaccine injured or what,
Sure.
all it takes is that one thing. And then you start sniffing around and you start, realizing everything stinks.
Right.
So,
Right. Well, yeah, that will be interesting. I'm not as hopeful about my governor being unseated just because he's he's very wealthy for starters, and he has the unions and has the whole time. But
you mean like
you never
politically
know.
wealthy? Like he's got a lot of
Well,
campaign
no,
cash
he's,
to
I mean,
spend.
the Pritzkers are there. That's the Hyatt Hotel family. And they're like in Chicago, the Pritzkers, they're like the Gettys. And so they are philanthropically like everywhere, right? Like we have Pritzker Pavilion, we have Pritzker School of Molecular Biology at University of Chicago. We have the Pritzker, I think, ironically, like there's a Department of Mental Health, funny enough, at Lurie Children's Hospital named after our governor or our governor's family. So yeah, they're very well resourced. And I mean, before all this, honestly, I had a good impression of the Pritzker family, and I hadn't delved into them too deeply, but just because their name is everywhere in the city, I'm like, wow, these people do some good things with their money. Needless to say, I don't have that impression anymore.
That was a pre-COVID assumption. I
Yeah.
had the same thing,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh, they're philanthropic. They must care.
Right. But I mean, he has money invested in a couple testing companies, and, so there haven't been enough questions. Actually, there've been a couple journalists who have delved into kind of his role in, testing or his investments and things like that, but not enough, not enough to really move the needle. So we'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see what happens.
Oh
We
my
need
God.
our candidates. I don't know if the New York candidates have been saying this, but as of right now, we don't have a candidate who has come out swinging against Pritzker, right? Like, your pandemic response policies hurt families, right? Like, we need to, get these kids unmasked. You killed people. Like, we don't have anybody
Yeah,
yet.
they're doing that here,
Oh
actually.
yeah, well that's awesome, because we do not, which probably says a lot about just kind of how Illinois is run in general. But we don't even have our Republican. Although one of the candidates is a state rep, Darren Bailey, he fought against Pritzker in all of these COVID restrictions from the beginning. But from the Chicago Metro perspective, he's a guy from downstate. He has a lovely accent, but like people don't really. It's lovely. I mean, he's a great guy, but I'm not sure how well that plays up here. And just our other candidates so far, they haven't really shown like that ability to rally, angry moms. Like they haven't gone that route yet. And somebody needs to leverage that energy and really go after go after
Yeah.
Pritzker. So
I think
maybe
that
soon.
no, but I think what you're bringing up is really interesting because I think it's a symptom, right? It's so Kevin McCarthy is the minority leader, released. I tried to find it, but I think he pulled it because he got panned for it. But he released this list, this like 5-point list of like what the congressional Republicans are gonna do, and it was the most like focus grouped mishmush of pablum that you could possibly imagine. It was like, there was nothing about COVID, there was nothing about the border, it was just the most benign, like, we
Out
want
of
hugs.
touch.
Oh, it was so
Yeah.
out of touch. And I think that, and it's funny because I think that that's what a lot of politicians are still stuck in this pre-COVID, frankly, pre-Trump era. And, say
Mhm.
what you want about Trump, and I wasn't a big fan of his exact style, but if you sort of strip away, the wrapping of Trump, um, he understood something very important, which was that crap that we were just talking about is like, it doesn't matter. People don't
Right.
want that. You know what I mean? And
Right.
it's like you have to be honest. You have to be true. You have to, say hard truths. You have to be yourself,
Right.
and
Right.
there's so many politicians that are still being run by, these PACs and these consultants and these polling firms who do, there's so much, talk about money and testing. There's so much money in like political strategy. And, this is part of my world in terms of marketing. And it's like, you look at bad commercials where you look at a commercial on TV, even for like a candy bar, and you're like, like, how did they come up with that? Like, I don't want to eat that candy bar. It's the same thing.
Right.
They get so tied up in their own underwear that they just come out the other side as this big lump of who cares, of meh.
Right. Right. Yeah, like they're trying to pander to a bunch of different things, but it just comes off as like, yeah,
Handed to
being
nobody.
being out of touch or just like, do you get it at all? Where it's and I have to confess, I didn't follow the Virginia governor race, closely, but it seems like, Youngkin really did a good job of leveraging that energy, right? From moms and parents who were fed up with the COVID stuff, right? I mean, am I
It,
right? That's my impression.
you are right. He eventually did. He ended up stumbling into it, right? And I wasn't, even though that I used to live in Virginia, and I
Same.
followed it fairly closely.
Mhm.
That's right. You went to UVA,
Yep, yep.
but I think that at least from my perspective, I think somebody could probably correct me a little bit, but it seemed like he started off very poll driven. You know, he's a businessman, first time politician. He has handlers. He wasn't doing that well until that debate when the school stuff, the mask, the COVID restrictions in schools, plus CRT, right?
Right, that's
Or
right.
the
That's right.
DEI stuff, and there was a question to Terry McAuliffe in the debate, and Terry McAuliffe literally said that he didn't feel like parents should have a say so or be involved in their kids'
That's
education,
right.
and at the debate, Youngkin really didn't pounce. Like
Mhm.
he said the right thing, but it wasn't like he seized on it. In the ensuing days after that gaffe, the parents in Virginia went ballistic, and
Mhm.
Youngkin finally sort of was like, "Wait a second,
Sure,
like
sure.
I can tap into that." And then that was when sort of the gloves came off. You could feel like his appearances and his speeches were less scripted. Like he was kind of out there, like, honestly being himself, and it really did seem like he agreed with that.
Right,
From a personal level, and that's when it started resonating. That's when he came ahead in the polls, and that's when he won. At
right.
least that was what I saw from my POV.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's what we need here. We need somebody who's willing to pounce on the very, very obvious weaknesses of the governor of Illinois. But like
Pounce,
pounce. I mean,
please.
we have a candidate, Jesse Sullivan, who's from downstate, a more rural area, but he is literally the physical opposite of Pritzker. And for people who don't know JB Pritzker, he's a short, um, very generously weighted,
It's a big boy.
individual. He's a big guy. Jesse Sullivan is tall, he's thin, he has like 4 or 5 kids, a beautiful wife. He's great. He looks like a Ken doll for sure. But I think they homeschool their kids, which is fine. I homeschooled my kids last year in the face of all the crazy. And so I get it, but like he has to show that he gets the damage that Pritzker has wrought on
Right.
families and children and all Illinoisans. And I'm not seeing the fire yet. Right. Like, I mean, and granted, I'm a fiery person, but like, I want to see the fire. Like this governor ruined people's lives. He ruined the state. Our state was already in the hole, but he made it worse. And, I need a candidate who's going to say that and get fired up about it. So if any candidates are listening to our
Agree.
little thing here, but
Yeah, but it not to excuse. I totally agree. Not to excuse it, but they're still looking at the numbers. It is very data driven, and there are still the majority, right, or close to it, of parents who believe this shit.
Oh, I know.
Right?
I mean, yeah.
And it's like they're looking at that. They're like, I don't want to piss them off either.
Right.
But I agree with you. It's like they have to lead, is what they need to do.
Sure.
Right.
Yep. Which is what a governor should ideally do as well. But
no, they should just take emergency powers and issue executive orders.
Yeah, exactly. By fiat, governed by fiat.
Oh my God. Well, anywho, did we solve it?
No.
Did we fix it? No. Okay.
No. We made ourselves feel better though. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
All right.
Now that we have the right sound, right?
We're getting better.
We've upgraded our sound. Yeah, I think so.
My battery failed me though.
I have to figure out how to drop things into this platform. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Because some things come to mind in the moment, but or like, do the, like Tim was saying, like, have the computer, but the camera is different than the computer. Right. So like if I'm looking something up, I'm not hovering over the computer.
It is nice to have like a separate, because I have the separate camera, right? And so when I'm looking for something on the computer, I'm looking up here.
Right.
I mean, you get to see up my nose, but that's the only downside, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. But
we'll fix it.
All right, we'll fix it.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right, well, hang in there. We will talk again soon.
All right. Yeah. Sounds good.
Team Reality.
All right, Team Reality. Team R. All right. Bye.